All right, today I want to move, we finished up talking about the Persian Empire last time. I want to move into talking about Grecian rule, or maybe you would call it the Hellenistic period, starting in about 331, roughly, to maybe 164 BC, or maybe 143 BC or BCE, depending on which particular version you prefer. Yeah. I like the BC AD better than the BCE and CE date, so that's what I use.
It's just easier.
Well, and it leaves something about the year of our Lord in the equations of the Christian era.
Oh, is it the Christian era?
Yeah, Christian era before Christian era.
Oh, I thought it was common era.
Maybe it is. I've heard of both. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, you can even get rid of any aspect of Christian if you call it common era.
Yeah. We did history of Western civilization. I think we spent like a paragraph talking about Jesus. So there you go. Totally high school.
Well, you know, there are many who say he was a historical figure, just like any other Jew that died and was gone.
It's been like, a week talking about Muhammad and all those guys.
A paragraph.
Yeah.
This probably starts with Philip of Macedonia. Philip, a picture of him in your notes there, at least what somebody thought he looked like when they did this artwork. He was a ruler in Macedon. During his rule, he gradually conquered more and more of the area. He set the stage for Alexander the Great's conquests. He began it and set the stage for it and had some early success, but was not able to finish it, and we'll talk about why he wasn't able to in a minute. He transformed Macedonia from a backwater society to a powerful and influential society. Maybe you have a little glimpse of this with the modern evolution of a place like Singapore from third world to first world in the last 50 years. And if you talk to people from Singapore, they talk about their founder, in a sense. They're almost a nation by default, because they tried to give the property to Malaysia, and Malaysia didn't want it, so they said, okay, fine, we'll be our own country, kind of thing. Now they're one of the electronics and banking capitals of the world with some significant weight. You think of maybe Haiti. That was the Macedonia at the time. That was people's impression of Macedonia. This country just can't get its act together. They struggle. They don't have. They're not sophisticated. They're not astute in business practices or government, and it's just a mess. That was Macedonia, and Philip saw what was going on, and he tried to develop it to more of a modernized, educated nation, and he had great success in doing that. And I have some slides I want to show you of the area that he began with, in a sense. Let me put this a little bigger. He began with the area on this map that's red, Macedonia. That was at the beginning of his reign. By the end of his reign, you can see that there's a significant amount of territory that he gained. This is all Philip through his conquests. Some of it was due to military conquest. He made the professional soldier an occupation rather than a part-time job. They were full-time soldiers rather than farmers who soldiered in off times. You can conquer more land that way.
Yeah.
And if you go up against countries that, we're farmers, and once in a while we pick up our pitchfork and go fight. I don't know they had pitchforks, but something like that. So that was the advent. What you see in the later Roman army is in some ways reflective of this idea that Philip started. He started paying his soldiers, and they were full time, and it made a huge difference in the amount of land that he could conquer. He also developed a method of fighting that employed long spears about 18 feet long. You'd have to be strong to hold that up, which was very effective in close combat. On page 9, you see that the Macedonian phalanx, notice that they have these 18-foot swords or spears, and you know they're in line, one behind the other. So if you're going against them with your sword, that's maybe a foot long, 2 feet long, and okay, you can't even get close to them. You have to get through all of the points of all of these spears, and they're marching at you with these things. So it was very effective, and many times they saw them coming and said, "Fine, okay, good, we're done." So you have the development of the full-time soldier. You have the development of some military strategy. He's thinking about this and trying to develop it in that particular way. Now, some of his territory he gained by marriage, not by conquering it. Notice that you have Epirus on the left side of the map. That's sort of red striped. That means he never went to that place and conquered that territory, but he married some woman from there, so they were allied together. They were in some sense under his control because he had one of his many wives. Most of the places he went, he just conquered them. You'll notice even at the height of what he did, very, very southern tip of Greece, Athens never succumbed to him. And there was some animosity between the two. Number 3, many of his conquests came through diplomatic means. He married at least 5 non-Macedonian women in order to forge political alliances with other regions. One of those wives was Olympias from Epirus. She was the mother of Alexander the Great. So he marries Olympias from Epirus to forge an alliance, and she has his son, Alexander. Now, he's Macedonian, she's Epicurean, or Epirusian, I guess, maybe, not Epicurean, different thing. So he is not purely Macedonian, and that's going to come up later because he's not full-blooded Macedonian. How can he lead this Macedonian empire? And there's some kickback to that. Do you think that this marrying multiple wives thing will work today? Yeah, you want to strike a truce with Iran. Should the president of the United States marry a woman from Iran?
I don't know that it would work on a national level, but maybe on a regional level within a country or something.
Yeah.
Depending on the culture.
Yeah, I wonder that it doesn't seem to me that would work well.
Yeah.
Any longer, and maybe there are different reasons for that.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed to be a very common way, even in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
150 years ago, they were still doing this kind of thing. Try to forge these alliances and have these, we're not going to fight against you because that's our daughter kind of thing. Yep. It worked successfully for Philip for a while. Philip made sure that his son Alexander had the finest education possible at the time. He contracted with Aristotle to train Alexander. Now, Aristotle was Greek. Mm-hmm. He was not Macedonian.
Yeah.
So he wanted this training, by the way, of Aristotle's training of Philip had a large impact on Alexander's future reign. I think you underestimate the influence Aristotle had on the world by the time Jesus got there. Because Aristotle trained Alexander in government and philosophy and those kinds of things. And then he went out and ported that around the world, and the Hellenized world was basically a vision of Aristotle. It was carried out by Alexander. So this is a significant influence in his life. Philip, it's interesting, in a famous letter Philip wrote to Aristotle, Philip said, King Philip of Macedonia to Aristotle, greeting. Know that a son has been born to me. I thank the gods, not so much that they have given him to me, as that they have permitted him to be born in the time of Aristotle. I hope that thou wilt form him to be a king worthy to succeed me and to rule the Macedonians. That's an interesting flattery, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
He wants his son trained by Aristotle, so he's going to butter up Aristotle. I'm so glad he was born when you were alive. Who wouldn't want to train that person? And this must be appealing to Aristotle too. I'm going to train the next king of that region. And as he saw that region expanding and growing, there's more influence that he can have over that area through his training of Alexander. Demosthenes, a great Greek orator from Athens, wrote several documents warning of the destructive impact Philip could have on the Grecian city-state democracies. Remember, Greece was the city-states. Athens and Sparta, they had their own governments, and they were a self-contained entity a little bit. And they were worried about what Philip was going to do, because Philip was king. He didn't care about these towns being their own government. He wanted to rule them all. So you have these independent city-states in Greece not liking what Philip's doing, and Philip not liking what they're doing. So you have some of this animosity going back. Demosthenes said of Philip, not only no Greek, nor related to the Greeks, but not even a barbarian from any place that can be named with honors. I mean, Philip's not even a barbarian that we can honor. But a pestilent knave from Macedonia, whence it was never yet possible to buy a decent slave. Not real flattering terminology about Philip, is it? They didn't really like him. That's a pretty good insult. You're a nobody from a country you can't even find a good slave from. Now, again, buying a slave at this time is different than it was in 1800s American buying a slave. So don't get confused as to what's going on there. They were basically saying we can't even find a good employee from there. None of them know how to work. This demonstrates the animosity between Macedonians and the Greeks. They never accepted each other as related. Only radically different in worldview. So, completely different worldviews. But you notice what's going on here. While there's this animosity between them, Philip is asking a Greek to train his son to be the next king. Well, what's bound to happen with those kinds of influences? It's going to become more Greek, because Alexander is going to think more like a Greek, at least more like Aristotle. Philip, started out great, gained all this territory, but he caused his own demise in part because of his seventh marriage. He married Cleopatra, not the Cleopatra of Egypt, but Cleopatra. She was a Macedonian of high nobility. So he had all these alliance wives and decided he'd marry a Macedonian of high nobility. We don't know exactly why he decided to do this. Maybe he thought she was cute. Maybe he was trying to raise his status because he was this lowly knave that everybody thought low of. And he probably was driven by the idea, if I marry into nobility, then I'm higher up. And that looks good for me. Nonetheless, he marries this woman, Cleopatra. After this marriage, some, led by a general Atalaus, Cleopatra's uncle, hoped for a legitimate heir to Philip's Macedonian throne. Philip had plans for Alexander. He's having him trained to be the next king. And now there's some people that say, we need a real, pure Macedonian blood heir to take the throne after him. Alexander reportedly threw a cup at Atalaus at his insult that he was not a legitimate heir. So they're sitting around, the castle, And Attilaus says this out loud in the hearing of Alexander, and Alexander's so upset that somebody would insult him because he was trained and he's the guy, so he throws a cup at him. Apparently that wasn't good because Philip responds by charging at Alexander with his sword drawn, only to trip and fall on his face because of his drunkenness. So Alexander's saved. And after that, because of that, Alexander publicly questioned Philip's ability to lead Macedonia and its planned conquest of Persia to the east. So there's some, disgruntledness amongst them, as Philip's trying to show himself to be more and more lofty. He doesn't like this, throwing a cup kind of thing that makes you look podunk again. I think is probably what's going on. So at number 7, Olympias and Alexander flee to Epirus. They get out of town because Philip's not happy right now. And you need to get away from him to protect your life. He was allowed to return later, but was always in a precarious situation. Because it is true that he was not purely Macedonian, and now they're looking for another that might be. So it was not a great situation. And then to add to it, Philip and Cleopatra had a male child, Corinth. So now there is someone who's purely Macedonian. So that puts Alexander in what position? Oh, okay. Are you going to be the king or you're not going to be the king? Maybe this other son is going to. Because Macedonians, if they're pulling for this, Alexander might be out. Philip began the Persian campaign by sending an advance troop to prepare the way for the rest of his army, which would follow shortly. So he's questioned by Alexander about whether you should really go do this Persian thing or not. And in the process of all that goes on, he eventually sends an advance team, and he's on his way to conquer Persia now. And then there was this wedding day. That's the wedding day of all wedding days. Number 9, in 336 BC, on the way to the Persian front, Philip attended the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra to Olympias's brother Alexander. So his daughter to his wife's brother. I don't think age meant as much as alliance again. But here you have this wedding. While at the wedding, he was assassinated by Pausanias. So Philip goes to his daughter's wedding, and he's assassinated by this guy. Pausanias was one of Philip's bodyguards. Some sources say one of his former bodyguards. Exactly which, I don't know for sure if he was a former or a current. Sorry, my phone's going off. I apologize. No, it won't. In an attempt to escape, Pausanias was also killed. So he kills Philip, and then in his attempt to escape, he's killed. There is some mystery as to why Pausanias decided it'd be a good idea to kill Philip. It could have been for previous mistreatment by Philip. Maybe if he was a former bodyguard, he was disgruntled because he got fired from his job being a bodyguard, and he was going to get back at him at this wedding. Or maybe because of the encouragement of Olympias and Alexander. Alexander was questioning whether he should go to this Persia thing. As a result, there was animosity between the two and some problems between the two. And now this other son is born. Maybe they're going to get rid of Philip before this other son has a chance to develop into someone that could take Alexander's place. Because if you're Olympias, you want your son to be the king and follow. So there's a lot of intrigue going on during this particular wedding and the events of it. How would you like this to be your wedding day? Oh yeah, my dad got killed and his former bodyguard got killed too. It wasn't a great our wedding. Let's go look at the pictures. We should not be surprised by this though. You know, is this civilized behavior? No, but everybody that has a sin nature has a tendency to act in a way that's not civil. And this was purely power. Has anybody in America been killed by a political power? Probably, we just don't know. So it's not like this doesn't go on even today, for that matter. But that ends Philip. And what had begun as promising, now he's done, and it's time for Alexander to take over. So let's go back a little bit. He takes over the rule in 331, but I want to go back a little bit and get a little bit more of his upbringing, other than just the Aristotle thing. He was born in Pella, the capital of Macedonia. And if you see just below the word Macedonia on this map, you have Pella, pretty close to the water there. To Philip and Olympias, he was used providentially by God to conquer the world and transform it into a Hellenized culture. And we'll talk about the significance of that to understand the New Testament, because there are a lot of Hellenistic ideas that influence how we understand what's going on in the New Testament. When the Romans conquered Greece, they didn't necessarily change the worldview, they just took it over. So what we see in Alexander's conquest and the way he changed the world, it sets the stage for the culture at the time of Christ even. He was trained by Leonidas to value discipline, physical training, endurance. The most famous anecdote of this period was that Alexander complained that Leonidas's idea of breakfast was a long night march, and of supper a light breakfast. Apparently he was training him like a Navy SEAL or something. This was, a strict discipline. It served him well on his military campaigns. He could go without eating. He prized physical strength, would make sure in a sense that he cared for his body best as possible. I think that if you think of all of the gyms in America where people go work out because there's this fascination with physical fitness, that was what he learned from this guy. Discipline, physical fitness, it was all part of what he was trained from a young age. In the box about on page 10, another important trait of Alexander was he had a remarkable memory. Seldom forgot a slight. Certainly never forgave one. He was intense. When Leonidas chastised the boy for throwing too much incense into the sacrificial fire and sarcastically suggested that he could be so extravagant only after he conquered the spice-bearing regions of the world, Alexander answered years later by conquering Gaza and sending his former teacher 18 tons of incense and spices. Here, remember what you said to me? Here it is. Leave me alone. Just to make a point, 18 tons. It's a lot of spice and incense. Alexander was not a man to be taunted or crossed, nor was he a man who ever lacked courage. The story of the young man Alexander taming the wild horse Bucephalus when other men older than he had failed is typical. He was a physical specimen. He was an imposing figure. You didn't mess with him. So he has the physical abilities, the discipline from his teacher at a young age, Leonidas, and he has the philosophical and educational background from Aristotle. He's a force to be reckoned with. He has been given the best of both of those worlds, and by the time he goes out to conquer the world, he's ready. And nobody's going to mess with him. His pure Macedonian half-brother is not going to dare to take the king from him until the end of his life, and then you'll see what happens to him. But he trained for He was trained for 3 years, starting at age 13 by Aristotle to love education and Greek culture. During the next 3 years, Aristotle gave Alexander a training in rhetoric and literature and stimulated his interests in science, medicine, and philosophy, all of which became important in Alexander's life. He was a great student. He was not a careless or slothful student. He learned the lessons and he understood what was going on and he grasped the importance of it. Most of Alexander's military, political, and anthropological philosophy is sourced in training by Aristotle. He ceased loyalty to the culture of Macedonia and became an ardent promoter of the Greek language and culture, even though he was Macedonian, which may have further irritated the people looking for a pure Macedonian heir who wouldn't be so corrupted by this Greek influence. Why would Philip choose to do this? Why go search out a Greek to train your Macedonian heir to the throne? There are a couple suggestions that people make. Maybe it was a way of reducing Greek animosity. If the Greeks don't like you and you become more like Greece, maybe they won't not like you less. As a possibility. It may be his way of proving he wasn't a barbarian like they claim. Who likes to be called an idiot? You know, you're an idiot. Let me prove to you I'm not. There was some motivation. You get the impression that Philip thought he was going to conquer the world and then turn it over to Alexander to run. Well, what do you need for someone to run a massive world empire? Well, it's already been conquered, so he doesn't have to be a soldier. He just has to be smart and educated and be able to think well. So maybe that's part of it as well. There is still that tendency in us today, isn't there? Why is there such a push among some evangelicals and maybe even Protestants for dialogue? Why do we think we have to have dialogue with people who deny the deity of Christ? To prove that we're not really that narrow-minded, shallow, funny mentalist kind of, can't think person. Oh, if we can talk the game, we're not. So I think it still does happen today. In an attempt to not appear as foolish to whom? To liberal theologians. Why would we care what they think? Why did Philip care what the Greeks thought? It says something about us to begin with. We want everybody to like us. So I think we need to be careful not to repeat that kind of thought in our lives. We shouldn't seek dialogue just to prove that we're not stupid. We need to trust Christ and believe what Scripture says and not care what people think we believe what Scripture says. Number 4, Plutarch describes him as an intelligent and ambitious boy. He is said to have entertained the Persian nobles while he was still a young boy and astounding them with his rhetorical skills. He was a sharp young guy. He was apparently upset every time Philip had another military victory, reasoning that there would be nothing left for him to conquer. He was a slight bit arrogant, self-focused, maybe, which maybe God used for him to accomplish what God wanted him to accomplish. Certainly, if he was shy and timid, he wouldn't have been the world conqueror that he was. Does that excuse his arrogance? No. Maybe another reason why he said his dad shouldn't go to Persia and conquer. You're not ready. That you should leave that for me. It's probably part of what he was thinking. Alexander may have envisioned himself in the image of Achilles the warrior who was immortalized in Homer's Iliad, which Aristotle would have him read. Hey, that's me. So he wanted lands to conquer. He dreamed of it. In fact, he advanced quickly in military ranks. At age 16, he was a regent subduing the Illyrians tribes. At 18, he was a leader of a cavalry unit. At 19, he was exiled with his mother because of that, throwing the cup event. Age 20, he commanded 35,000 veteran soldiers. That's a quick rise in the ranks. And apparently those 35,000 veteran soldiers respected him enough to follow him. At age 21, he took over leadership after the death of his father at that wedding. 21, he's in charge of all of that red area on the map. He's the guy. But he has proven that he's capable in many different ways. And he hits the ground running. He doesn't waste any time. Now's my time, let's go. So 6, after taking over his father, he quickly conquered most of the known world. And let me throw up a different map. Notice that it's slightly expanded. Instead of ending in this particular area, now you have Syria, and he conquered Gaza and sent spices back. And he's conquered Alexandria and the whole Egyptian area. He's gone into Babylon and towards Persia and controls that entire area. That's the area that he eventually controlled. Very quickly, 10, 11 years, he conquers all that area. Everywhere that he went, he started cities after the Greek model. And this is where it becomes significant, highly significant for the New Testament. Some of these cities that he started, Paul went to on his missionary journeys. And the cities he didn't start, he influenced to be the kinds of cities that Paul went to. He tried to instill Greek culture. Because of this, some call him the father of Hellenism. He took with him on his military campaigns. Now you're thinking, okay, he took those 18-foot spears and soldiers, but what did he take? He took a copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey. He took poets, city planners, anthropologists, biologists, historians, and musicians. Why did he want to take those with him? You remember what happened back in the Persian time? The Persians got so big that parts of the empire just kept, would just separate themselves and do their own thing. But if you, as you conquer the world, make everybody think like you think, they're going nowhere. So he is trying to, as he conquers the world, also instill the same Greek culture that he learned from Aristotle. So the kinds of things that were important in that kind of a city, that's what he wants to instill. He doesn't just want to conquer them. In fact, he's going to leave them there. He's going to let them worship their own gods. But they have to become Hellenized. And if they're Hellenized, they're going to be loyal, is the idea. That's why you see cities that will all have a theater, a gymnasium, a means of education. All of those Hellenized kinds of concepts are common from city to city. So when Paul goes on his missionary journeys, he can be pretty confident that no matter what city he goes to, they're going to think quite a bit alike. They're all going to share the same worldview. And that helps him as he goes from city to city to know the best approach to preaching the gospel. Instead of the city-state model, he likely envisioned a world-state, Hellenized form of government. He's probably influenced here by Aristotle's views, which were later recorded in his Republic, that is Aristotle's Republic. He didn't want all these little city-states. He wanted a world state where all the cities were pretty much the same. and he was in control of all the cities. When capturing Darius III's family, this is Persian Darius that we talk about, his mother, his wife, his sister, his son, and his treasure, he treated them with great respect. He treated the Persians as equals and wanted to change their worldview, not subjugate them to his power. He prized self-control more than domination of the Persians. He was teaching them to think like a Greek and be self-controlled, as opposed to those that were purely power-hungry in a sense. So he had a different notion of what he wanted to do now. Was he smart about it? No, we're going to find out that he still made some mistakes and miscalculated in some of the kinds of things that he tried. He was more interested in changing a worldview than conquering territory. But in the process of that, he gained a lot of territory. Number 7, Judea submitted to the rule of Alexander. In return, they were granted many privileges. At the same time, many Jews were sent to Alexandria to populate that city, and there was a significant Jewish population in Alexandria. And that's probably partly why Philo ended up there, and Philo's writing to defend the Jewish faith there among the educated in Alexandria. After conquering Babylon, he arranged and forced political intermarriages between his military leaders and the women of Susa. That didn't really go over too well. I'm a soldier, I'm fighting. Why do you want me to marry this Persian woman? Most of these marriages were dissolved after his death. Wasn't received with overwhelming support, which may be a understatement. Okay, yeah, you're going to let us be like, you want us to change our worldview. You're not going to try to dominate us, but what? You want your soldiers to take our women as your wives? It didn't go over well with the soldiers or the Persians. He died at age 33, so he took over at age 21. And at 33, he dies while in Susa. His father died on the way to Persia. He made it to Persia, that area, and died there. There is suspicion that he may have been poisoned. We don't know exactly. He had made several political moves that caused a good deal of unrest, like the intermarriages. He took the title of Pharaoh in Egypt. He donned the royal garments while in Susa. So he went and he basically said, I'm your king. You know, start thinking like me. And so listen to my educators, my biologists and city planners, and that's what we're going to do here. He apparently wanted to be treated as a god. There goes that ego again. He apparently lived a life of complete debauchery while in Susa, although there is some pushback to that. Plutarch says he avoided sexual relations and sleep because weariness and pleasure proceed both from the same frailty and imbecility of human nature, and he was above that. Maybe that's partly what he learned from Leonidas. Deny the self, be disciplined kind of thing. That's the official story from Plutarch. Probably, more accurately, he had both male and female lovers. And he had a child that was born after he died, which would mean that he was probably not avoiding sexual relations. You have that much power and that much influence and that much ego, you have women that would flock around him and want his attention. And I suspect that when he was so motivated, he took advantage of that. Even if the official story from Plutarch is slightly different. Alexander had a high fever, which seems to have worsened drastically when he drank some wine. His fever lingered for several days. Eventually, he died as a result of that fever in 323 BC at age 33. So some people say somebody poisoned his wine, and that's why it got worse. Some suggest that this is some kind of a sexually transmitted disease that finally caught up with him. I don't think we're going to know. It's too late for an autopsy, I think, although they might be able to figure some things out as they do these days. But this was his demise. 11 years of military campaigns. He never really, it seems, went back to Macedonia and sat on the throne there and just relaxed and enjoyed the life as king. He was constantly out there trying to convert more people to a Hellenistic way of thinking. And the people that followed him most closely were on board with that. So after he died, they're going to take over that. Several of Alexander's reforms had a tremendous impact on the world. You can look at Ferguson, Witherington for some of those. Let me list several of those in the notes. Letter A, Greek colonies have been planted and populated by Greeks all over the world. And Paul would have gone to those cities on his missionary campaigns. It would have shaped the worldview of the early church. The early church was full of people who were recovering from a Hellenistic worldview in some ways. Letter B, the universal acceptance of Greek culture was greatly hastened. The idea was Philip's, but the execution belonged to Alexander. One evidence is this is the prevalence of the gymnasia in cities around the world. Even in Israel, where some even resorted to surgery to reverse their circumcision in order for them to be able to compete in the Olympic style games. Because if you were circumcised, you were disqualified. And also, you see the theaters and the stadium events and related societies. You have the public baths and those sorts of things. So you have all sorts of activities. And by the way, those activities are a lot like today. The first century Hellenized world is a lot like the 21st century. They went to the theater for entertainment, and then in the morning they went to the gym to work out to make sure they were physically fit. Then they went to the mall, and then they went to their place of worship. The same kinds of activities and events in the first century are what we're doing today. We just don't have as much live theater. We just record it and put it on big screens. We still go to the store. We're still materialistic. You still have the emphasis on the physical fitness. It's almost become an idol in Christian circles, in my opinion. Way beyond what Scripture makes appropriate. I think Paul was right when he said bodily exercise profits a little. But godliness with contentment is great gain. But you see these cities and the mindset. He was successful in converting the way they thought. Let's see the advent of a one world economy. Alexander established one currency used throughout the world, silver coins based on the Attic standard. The letter D, the Greek language became more widely used and understood. A particular form of Greek called koine was popularized. Our New Testament is written in this language. So guess what? You write the New Testament in this language, the world can understand it. Because the entire world was speaking this Greek now. This is contrary to Thayer's idea. Thayer produced a Greek lexicon, a Greek dictionary of words for the New Testament. And his idea was that Greek of the New Testament is some special Holy Spirit Greek. And it's different than any other Greek that you see anywhere. This is Holy Spirit Greek. That's not the case. The Greek in the New Testament is exactly this Greek that was popularized by Alexander. And everybody began to speak. That's important as you try to figure out what words mean in the New Testament. If you want to know what words mean in the New Testament, you don't go to some special Holy Spirit dictionary. you go to how the words were used in this culture and in other documents. That's the idea, at least. Comments about that? All right, we're out of time. We'll pick up with letter E next time. What would that be, Wednesday?
Yeah.
And talk about the rest of the influence Alexander had, which was great. And maybe look at a couple of examples where some of it helps us to make sense in our understanding of the New Testament.
So was Philip's empire primarily Macedonian in culture? Or was it kind of just, I'm in charge of whatever you are?
He doesn't seem to have the same strategy of taking with him the biologists and the musicians and the copy of the Iliad, which gave some ideas. It was for him. It was more gain power and don't look so hick.
Okay.
And maybe eventually it would have changed, or maybe he would make Alexander his statesman to try to interact with these other groups that he's conquered to bring them up, but he doesn't get to the place where he can worry about it somehow because of Alexander's training and physical prowess and abilities. He could just do it as he went.
Because I mean, I would assume that the Macedonians, like that whole region, spoke Greek, but their culture would have been different. So.
Yeah, he was trying to bring them out of hickdom in some sense.
And so Alexander really doesn't bring Macedonian culture everywhere. He brings Greek culture because of Aristotle.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, he, even though he was half Macedonian, he still had, some influence from his mom's culture.
Yeah. That's true.
So yeah, he was an interesting combination, but no, he wouldn't have been let's just perpetuate what's always been.
Right.
He had bigger dreams.
Right. Cool.